Welcome back to PSA TV. You're viewing Eye on Labor here, and this morning we have on set the president of the All Trinidad General Workers Trade Union, Mr. Nirvan Maharaj. Welcome, Mr. Maharaj.
Thank you very much, and a pleasant good morning to you and your viewers.
I know you've came from quite a all distance.
Actually, complex, terrible traffic, but I'm still here.
All that for just for the viewers.
Thank you very much for having me.
Let's jump right into
Sure.
it. So I would have seen here that an article done in 2018 from the Newsday where you spoke about the importance of labor and politics, and you said that labor must get involved in politics. And in particular, something that stood out to me where you said there is absolutely no difference between politics and trade unions because every single policy or program implemented by a government that affects the working class affects trade unions.
Well, yes, I truly do believe that. I think there are a lot of people who attempt to create a line of demarcation between labor and politics, but at the end of the day, trade unions do represent the working class, and the working class are also the voters. The working class are also the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. And again, whatever policy or program implemented by a government that adversely affects the working class or the people, therefore becomes the problem of the trade union leaders and trade unions. And we have had a glorious history, I think, in Trinidad and Tobago with regard to 1976, for example, when major trade unions joined together and formed the United Labour Front. And I do think the time has come for the trade union movement to do the same and challenge the incumbent political parties and challenge the status quo in the interest of the people. You see, so I think it's very important. And I must congratulate, I think, my comrade Watson Duke and myself. I think we are the only two trade union leaders who have entered into the political realm. Mr. Duke in Tobago, and of course myself with the National Solidarity Assembly in Trinidad.
Yes.
So I think we have a lot of work to do in the trade union movement with regard to that. And let me say before, if I may, change can only come about through power. It makes no sense you rant and rave and shout and bawl and attack and condemn and criticize if you do not have the power to implement change. And power can only come through legislation.
Ask you that. Who gives you the power?
Yeah, you need to get into parliament, you need to challenge the status quo, you need to become a very powerful political lobby. Therefore, if you don't enter into parliament through the electoral process, the fact is you are so powerful that you could influence parliament and influence legislative change in labor for the better of the country as a whole.
If I could just ask you a little bit about your trade union. What is your trade union about? For those of you who may not know, what is...
Well, the All Trinidad General Workers Trade Union, formerly the All Trinidad Sugar and General Workers Trade Union.
Most people would have known it like that.
We were formed in 1937 together with the OWTU. We are perhaps the oldest trade unions in the country, both the OWTU and the All Trinidad. We would have represented workers in the sugar industry for many, many years until 2003 when the sugar industry was closed down and the All Trinidad would have lost about 15,000 members. But in addition to that, we represented not only sugar, we represented the manufacturing and the service industries as well. So that today, we are proud to say we have maintained our professionalism. We have been able to continue to represent the working class, and we represent over 2,000 more workers in addition to about 20 companies that we represent. So we are continuing doing the work that we have to do.
I know the issue of Carney has been...
Yes, and that Carney issue is still very much outstanding because you still have about 4,000 ex-Carney workers to get what is due to them in terms of their paper title ownership. That is the leases for their residential plots and agricultural plots. So that is an issue that would have been outstanding since 2003. And if I may say, I don't think there's any other group of people in this country who have been so unfairly treated, where you have a mandatory court judgment, an order of the High Court being breached by successive governments. And to date, you still have 4,000 waiting to get what is due to them. Not a gift or a handout, of course, but a legal entitlement by law.
It's an entitlement, And what is the next step, if I may ask you, in terms of getting some sort of resolve to that issue?
Well, we have had many promises by governments, marches, demonstrations, protests. We have had many meetings with those in authority, with the People's Partnership Government, with the PNM government. At the end of the day, the only thing we can do, because it's a political solution really, it's not a question of going back to court because the court has already arbitrated on the issue.
Yeah.
And once one plot was given out, it means that the process started. I think the problem here is really the expeditious implementation of the process in giving out these lands and leases. It's a political solution. And I have attempted to deal with it politically. I've also called on the opposition because I think the opposition would have failed miserably, saying that the majority of these persons are supporters of the opposition United National Congress in any event.
Yeah.
And I think the time has come for the opposition members of parliament who represent these workers, Caroni Central, Couva North, Couva South, Point-a-Pierre, Earl Pooch, Princestown, Naparima, to really raise this matter as a matter of urgent public importance at the level of parliament and have this thing debated at the level of parliament in order to bring some type of resolution to this outstanding issue. Because we will continue to agitate and articulate, but at the end of the day, it is the politicians in parliament who have the power.
They have the power, yeah.
And it's the same point. For trade unions to get power, they have to really influence or enter the doors of parliament.
And they go hand in hand.
It does, actually, it does,
and,
yes.
And in an interview I was doing, I think it was Tuesday, the comment was made that, the labor unions are the backbone of the country.
Yes, we are. We represent the working class, whether someone is a member of the union or not, or unions on the whole.
Yeah.
I think the majority of persons in this country who work for an employer would have benefited from the labor struggles of the 1930s and 40s. Sick leave, casual leave, vacation leave, industrial court, the Ministry of Labor, all these things, are what unions would have fought for and bled for and struggled for. And so you are right, trade unionism is actually the backbone of the working class and any person who collects a paycheck, whether they are a member of the union or not. And while we were talking about parliament, the trade union movement have been articulating for a lot of legislative change.
Yes.
I have called for the amendments to the Retrenchment and Severance Benefit Act, the Companies Act. We have called for greater power to be given to the industrial court. We have called for an indemnity fund for if in case foreign-based companies come down here like the steel workers, what happened to them and wind up, that you have a fund that these companies contribute to so that workers will get their just due. So there are many, many things that the Labour Front would have called for and earned by our sweat on behalf of the working class. Yes.
If I could just go back on
Sure.
Retrenchment. When you look at the way things are in Trinidad today, you see that retrenchment happens almost every other day.
It does, yes.
Sometimes you may hear about it via the media, sometimes it's done underhand. And you often wonder now, well, why is there so many unemployed people? But you realize now that retrenchment happens too often.
Well, I am not going to say that there may not be justifiable reasons at specific times.
Right.
There may be companies who face.
It's how it's done.
But I think there are many companies who are using the economic or so-called economic crisis to implement retrenchment in a bid to get rid of permanent workers who would be entitled to a lot of terminal benefits and packages. And by getting rid of these workers, you could rehire workers on contract at lower terms and conditions. I think retrenchment has really been used as a weapon by companies to crush the trade union movement and to really put the working class on a back foot, meaning that you have them under duress, you waive the threat of retrenchment over them so that whatever you want them to do, they will do and accept when we look at terms and conditions. Yes. There have almost been, I think, about 40,000 people retrenched so far. Yeah. And you see, everything in the country is interlinked. There's an interlocking directorate of things, if I may say so. So you have about 40,000 retrenched, but you have the government given an amnesty to thousands of persons who will then be providing cheap labor and sweatshops to many persons, I think, in the manufacturing sector and the service industry and what have you. So something has certainly gone around with what is happening in this country. And that is why I think, and I must commend Watson and of course the All Trinidad Union, because you need to involve yourselves in a way that you could affect and influence those who have the authority to make decisions and to make legislative change. And that is where the politics comes in. You see.
Yes, that's tying to back the article where you talked about the importance trade unions and labor in particular plays with politics.
But certainly, because anytime we become complacent about the rights and privileges that we would have fought for and bled for, then you would find that these rights and privileges could be easily taken away through the guise of policy and legislation and reform. Until the trade union movement is in a position to influence legislation, we will always be in trouble. We will always be marching on the streets. We will always be demonstrating and protesting, but without the necessary power to influence the change that we want. And that is why that article, that point of view that I had, I think still stands today. Especially when, it is my point of view, when I see an interlocking directorate of party financiers and even members of parliament on both sides of the divide. There is an interlocking directorate. So whatever party is in power, he who pays the piper will call the tune. And whoever is in power, you are looking at the same, two sides of the same coin. And whoever is in power will do the same thing and implement the same policies and carry on the same decisions that was made previously. For us to influence this, we have to get in power.
That is done because citizens just take everything and stay quiet.
We do, I think, to a very large extent. Our country has been stymied because of the historical dynamics of how we evolve politically. Because our politics is so based on the concept, the geographics of the politics is so based on race.
Yes.
That political parties think that they own your votes rather than having to earn your votes. And once, as long as parties are sure that I will get 15 seats and I will get 18 seats no matter what I do, because of the historical dynamics of the country, in terms of how we evolved from independence, going through the days of the PNM and the DLP, then you had the ACDC DLP, then you had the Alliance, then you had the United Labour Front, uniting with the DAC in Tobago, Workers and Farmers Party, you had the coming together of making the NAR. As long as you have these things where one segment of the population and another of the segment of the population always view each other as them or us, fueled by the politicians, then we are in a problem, and labor is in a problem. And that is why many times I would have discussions with even my labor colleagues, and I will be telling them whenever we talk about the politics, we need to get involved because we have to teach the people of this country. If Trinidad was one race of people, what criteria would you use to vote a political party?
Sure.
And if we could answer that honestly and objectively, you may begin to see change in Trinidad and Tobago. And that is why the trade union leaders advocating politically also is so very important. And again, I must say I've only seen 2 trade union leaders do that. Watson, you and myself, no other.
And in case you're now joining us here on PSA TV, you're viewing Eye on Labour with the president of the All Trinidad General Workers Trade Union, Mr. Nirvan Maharaj. And we've been talking about labor and its importance in politics and how they kind of go hand in hand, if I may say.
Yes, they do.
And also the structure of the trade unionism and how critical it is in this day.
It's very critical, but while I'm saying it is critical, again, like I said, everything is interlinked to each other. You need change, legislative change, to ensure that it becomes even more valid and legitimate within the context of the economics of the day. For example, you have an industrial court, But the industrial court is almost like a toothless bulldog, because at the end of the day, it does not have the power to enforce its own judgments. So a worker may very well get a judgment from the court, but he will have to go to the High Court of Justice to enforce the judgment. Additional cost. Sometimes what companies are doing now, they have orchestrated a plan where they are appealing all the judgments of the court, major judgments. So ordinary workers and unions who may not have the finance now have to go to the Court of Appeal to articulate on the matter. Another thing I think, Christy, that is very important is we need to see change in the recognition and certification board. It cannot be that 51% of a company is saying we want this union to represent us, but it's taken 3 and 4 years before a union could get recognition. That is idiotic and moronic at best. We need legislative change and amendments to that piece of legislation also. You have to make it simpler. Within 2 months of 51% of the workers of a company saying we want that union should be able to negotiate terms and conditions for those workers. So there are many, many things that are interlinked, and one does not operate in isolation of the other.
That's true.
And that is why the trade union movement, I think, to a very large extent, I don't know if I'm allowed to say it on this program, but I think to a very large extent the trade union movement, we are missing the ball at times, simply because we have had some of the biggest marches in this country, but at the end of the day when we speak, we are not giving to those we are addressing at the end of the march a sense of hope that the movement is going to do this or that. Because we keep telling them, and we keep doing the same thing and expecting a different result. It doesn't work that way. And you can't hold my hands and I hug you up in public and we call ourselves a brotherhood in labor and you are poaching my members. It doesn't work that way. I think we really have to get together, all the leaders of the trade union movement, and thrash out our issues. Because we are united on specific issues, but we are very divided when it comes to ideology and politics. And if we don't come together and sort this thing out, we may very well find ourselves being left behind in a fast-changing economic dynamic, you see.
Can you just tell me,
Sure.
in your capacity as a lawyer, the switch from contract labor, from permanent labor to contract labor, a lot of people, the picture is painted in such a way that you think, okay, contract labor is this glorious thing. But then
No, it's not.
the employer, the worker does not know, well, okay, I would not have the same rights.
That's correct.
A lot of things aren't explained very well.
Well, what happens when you go into contract labor is that you are now making an individual contract with your employer. You have given up the right to be represented by a trade union as a collective body, where a union could come in and negotiate terms and conditions for you as a collective. When you go into contract labor, it means that when your fixed term contract is over, you could be discarded quite easily. When you are a permanent employee, you enjoy certain rights and privileges under labor legislation, under the law, and within the context of having union representation. There are many companies who are attempting, and I think it's happening in the judiciary,
Yes.
where you have a lot of workers who are permanent within the public service. You are trying to disband those permanent workers, which certainly in law you cannot do. But I think the trick that they are going to use in the public service is because you fall within the realm of the Public Service Commission, who has the right to move around its officers. You may very well find that what they can do is that workers who work in the judiciary could be moved into other areas. And you now employ workers on contract in the judiciary. And what you have done there is to basically eliminate the union that would have had the right to negotiate terms and conditions for the workers within the judiciary. So you have to look at it from many different angles. So certainly I do not support the concept of contract labor, because I think contract labor is a way by which employers can just simply exercise their own whims and fancies with regard to to the labor market.
And now it will affect trade unions and
yes.
their membership at the
Yes.
end of the day, because if it is that you're saying that contract workers, they won't be represented by trade unions, then
Certainly they won't, and what will happen is that if someone believes that their contract would have been breached, you may go to a trade union who could probably take up the issue for you as an individual member.
Yeah.
But again, that will entail a cost because you have not been a member of a trade union negotiating terms and conditions. You may or may not succeed because the union will have to take it up as a trade dispute within the jurisprudence of labor legislation and the industrial court. You may or may not succeed in it being a trade dispute. Then you may have to take it up in the high court, on the civil courts, as a breach of contract. So it makes it extremely difficult for a worker having a contract to really gain the representation that at a minimal cost that they would have had if they would have been represented by a trade union.
Do you sometimes feel like probably the government is probably intimidated by trade unions?
But I think they are, because if you look at the history of this country, and most countries, many in the Caribbean as well, the labor front has always formed the basis of governmental policy. And I think what affected that in our country is that we never saw ourselves as one people. We suffer in Trinidad and Tobago from a lack of patriotism and nationalism, because we have been cultured by our politicians to believe it's them or us. It's Trinidadian or Tobagonian. It's never Trinidad and Tobago. It's never persons of African descent and persons of East Indian descent being Trinbagonians. That when election time comes around, then you see how politicians have systematically and in an organized way used racism and discrimination.
And you see how divided we really are.
To ensure that we are divided when it comes to the politics, because we always perpetuate the view that the UNC would serve the interests of the East Indian bloc and the PNM would serve the interests of the persons of African descent bloc. When in truth and in fact, I do believe there are a majority of people in this country who wishes to rise above that. But there's so much fear being inculcated by the incumbent politicians that it will take some time, and that is why the trade union movement, who represent people across the board, is really the driving force that could bring about political change in Trinidad and Tobago. And I always say, and in some of my speeches politically, I always say, when you go to the hospital, you don't ask for Indian blood or African blood or Chinese blood. Blood is blood. And you certainly can't take the word Indian or African or Trinidadian or Tobagonian or Hindu or Muslim or Christian and go into the supermarket with it, or take your children to the doctor with it, or buy your children's books with it. So we in the trade union movement, and I'm talking from a labor perspective here, we have to take the initiative. We have to take the political initiative to bring about change in this country.
Also on that note, we go to a really short break right now. Stay with us. When we come back, we'll continue our conversation with Mr. Maharaj. And welcome back to Eye on Labor here on PSA TV. I'm your host, Christy Kali Singh, and we've been chatting all along with the president of the All Trinidad General Workers Trade Union, Mr. Maharaj. And before we went to a break, we were talking about the importance of trade unions to our country, and you touched on something very important, the judiciary.
Yes.
And I know that there's this controversial bill that could be, is it a bill or legislation? It's a legislation.
What they are attempting to do is to bring a piece of legislation, from what I gather, where there will be a hire in workers within the judiciary on contract.
Yeah.
Now that, we were speaking before, that has severe implications for those workers, but it also has severe implications for new workers who will be coming in on contract, because they would not fall within the realm of the protection of a trade union that has the recognition to represent the workers within that realm. And so what you have happening, I believe, it could be an undermining of the trade union representation there. It could be the public service in a bid to introduce contract, at least within certain public institutions, will be spreading the permanent workers around, many of whom would have built their lives around the judiciary, many of whom would have grown accustomed to working there, who would, because of the years of service, be very acute with what they have to do there. So what by do, and you are now bringing new people into the play,
and training the
meaning who would not be able to function as properly as those who were there before. So I have severe concerns about that. In fact, I am also very concerned as an attorney at law myself. And again, I'm saying it's a concern. Bringing workers on contract within the judiciary and removing from them the knowledge that they are protected under the public service rules and regulations from being terminated or dismissed in an arbitrary manner, and bringing new workers on fixed-term contracts, is it then that those who have hired you, whether it be those in authority, whether it be the judiciary itself, could now influence the manner in which you do your job? Are we therefore seeing external influence within the realm of the judiciary by placing people under duress, knowing fully well that you have to operate in a particular way so that your contract will be renewed at the end of 3 years? Whereas now, you have permanent workers employed who are fully aware that they could do what they have to do, that they could be firm and unflinching in their duty and do it in the right and proper manner without having any fear or favor that they could be adversely affected by those in authority. And I think that is my major fear with removing permanent workers who fall within the realm of the public service and bringing workers on contract.
In terms of benefits, let's talk about benefits. What are some of the benefits a permanent worker would have as opposed to a contract worker?
Okay, well, permanent workers, of course, will have benefits as negotiated by their union, the terms and conditions. Sick leave, casual leave, annual vacation leave, maybe incentives, bonuses, what have you. The benefits of a contract worker will be tied to the specific individual contract that that worker would sign with the employer. For example, you may have contract workers who may say, listen, I'm getting a lot more benefits than a permanent worker, but what they don't have is the protection of knowing that they are permanent.
If something were to go bad.
That's correct. And if their contract should run its term, it doesn't mean that they would be automatically rehired. So whereas there are many workers who may see the grass as being greener on the other side, with contract work, the fact is in the long run, it will work to your detriment because you are not assured of a job when the day comes. Because with the contract work, as far as I'm concerned, there's almost a clause in every contract that either party could terminate with good reason within 1 month's time, basically. Again, it depends. So the terms and conditions will depend on the individual contract, but you would lose the protection of a union, collective terms and conditions, a collective agreement that will protect you no matter what. In fact, in some collective agreements, you may have workers who will enjoy higher benefits in terms of retrenchment benefits, for example, terminal benefits, for example, because those things could be negotiated across the table. In terms of contract workers, you may very well find that the employer may adhere strictly to what is to be found in the legislation that governs, let's say, retrenchment, for example. 2 weeks, 3 weeks, depending on how long you work and what have you. So I will always, and not only as a trade union leader, I will always advocate to workers, be very careful when you accept contracts, especially within the public service and in those industries where you have permanent workers working alongside you. Because what may seem better now,
don't get fooled with all the...
That's correct. May very well turn out to be very adverse to you later on.
Because, I mean, a contract could be for what, a year, 2 years?
A year, 2 years, 3 years, depends.
It's based on whatever they want to give you?
Yes, the individual employer and the individual worker will work out that contract for themselves. So what you have happening is that the employer and the employee will be negotiating with each other. That employee is subjected to many factors while negotiating. Whereas when you have a union with people who are experienced, they will be able to negotiate on your behalf. And in addition to that, you have an organization that could fight for you and defend you no matter what, at no cost to you, except a minimal union dues at the end of the month.
And you'll also realize that you're not the only one in a union. You know, there are many other people from different segments, different sectors, who would be facing the same.
And that's a very good point, because there are many workers who believe, you know what, if I join a union, I could be victimized.
Yeah.
But I always tell workers, if you are in a union, you could be fired. And if you are not in a union, you could still be fired.
Yeah.
The difference is this: if you are not in a union, you could be fired without protection. But if you are in a union, if you are terminated, you have the protection of an organization to defend your rights to the end. And that is the difference. So it depends on the worker. Do I want protection, or am I willing to face whatever comes my way without that protection?
And I've been down to some of the marches that were held down at the Hall of Justice. And what I noticed is there's a younger working population there. So you have a lot of people, I'm guessing, probably just out of university, and that's all they could get, or probably that's what they want to do. So they're out there and they're working. And it's nice to see that young people are actually participating.
And they are willing to fight for their rights,
yes. But for those of the younger viewers who are watching, and they may not know, what are the perks of being in a trade union,
certainly there are two ways in which you could join a trade union.
Yeah.
First of all, a trade union could seek to represent the company that you are in from the basis of a collective way.
Yeah.
Whereas once the trade union gets 51% of the workers to join the union, the trade union could now make an application before the Certification and Recognition Board to be granted a certificate to represent the workers of that specific company within a specific bargaining unit, whether it be fortnightly paid or weekly paid or what have you. And in that way, the union will be able to negotiate terms and conditions for you. And you would have the protection under law of the trade union. The union could walk into your company and demand better conditions. The union could demand better health and safety conditions for you. There are many things and many benefits.
Yeah.
Sick leave, annual leave, vacation leave, bonuses, as I said before, better terms and conditions negotiated collectively. Now, if you are not in a company where the union, if you're in a company, let's say the union do not have the requisite 51%. Let's say you are just an ordinary worker outside there whose company do not have a union representation, but you want to join a union, you still can. The Constitution of this country gives you the right of association. There's nothing wrong in going very quietly to a trade union and joining that union. Start paying your union dues, because what it means is that even though the union will not be able to negotiate terms and conditions for you, if you are unfairly dismissed, wrongfully dismissed, constructively dismissed, or you are retrenched, the union could take up that matter for you. But if you do not belong to a union, I think what many workers do not comprehend is that labor law within Trinidad and Tobago falls within its own jurisprudence, which means that no lawyer in Trinidad and Tobago could take up a labor dispute for you. That is what many people do not understand. If you are terminated from your job, you cannot go to a lawyer and ask the lawyer to represent you. The only way the lawyer could do that is if they go to the civil courts and do it as a breach of contract, which will be extremely costly to the worker. When you are in a union, you have that representation, because only a union could report a matter to the Ministry of Labor and the Industrial Court.
I think there's also the misconception that a lot of people, a lot of workers have, is only when you're faced with problems, then you now go running to a trade union.
That is a very, I don't want to use the word, I won't use certain words, but that is a very childish and superficial way of looking at it, that if I have a problem, I'll go to a union. I will tell you why.
Yeah.
If you go to a union and you walk up the street, you will have to pay cost, administrative cost, the cost for witness statements, evidence and arguments, and what have you. If you are a member of a union, you don't have that cost to pay. All you are paying is your ordinary union dues of $60 or $80 per month. If something should happen to you and you are not a member of a union, it means, therefore, you will have to walk into a union, off the street, join the union, and face this cost. If you go to a lawyer to do something for you, even if you lose the matter in the civil court because you decide to take it up as a breach of contract, and you lose in the civil court, you will have to pay your lawyer's fees, and you may very well find you have to pay the legal cost of the winning party. Whereas if you belong to a union and you take up a matter, if you lose, the union lose. And if you win, the union win.
Financially and logically, it makes a lot of sense.
Total sense.
You join a trade union as soon as you can.
As soon as you can. Even as an individual member of the union, paying your union dues very quietly, but knowing fully well, in the event that you are wrongfully dismissed, unfairly dismissed, retrenched, that union will take up the matter for you. Because you would have been a member of the union for many months or years, as the case may be.
Do you think people are fully aware of the role trade union plays?
I don't think so, and I think to a very large extent our education system must be blamed, and I don't know whether it's a deliberate plot on the part of those in authority to ensure that the struggles and battles and the rights and privileges that trade unions would have fought for and gained on behalf of the people of this country should be hidden. And therefore in the schools what you find happening is that we teach a generic history of the Caribbean, and we teach a very generic history of the trade union movement, but we do not go into detail to show really and truly the benefits of joining a union. We don't show how unions would have struggled and battled for the rights that people enjoy today. And you know what is sometimes amazing to me is that you have so many people outside there condemning and criticizing trade unions.
Oh, that's all they could
not realizing that the very rights that they enjoy as employees of companies would have been fought for by trade unions. And let me make one point before we continue. When you see a trade union articulating and advocating and protesting and demonstrating, that is not the first thing that a trade union do, you know. That is the last resort. There's a procedure that unions will follow, and it is only after the trade unions have been treated with utter disdain and contempt by employers and those in authority that the unions take it to the streets and nationally.
It's last resort.
So there are many people who have the misconception when you think of a union, you think about, okay, they're going on the streets again. Not realizing that is the last resort, because you have to go through a process of meetings and consultations and conciliation before you reach that point.
Now we've had, just to switch things up a little bit, we've had a huge influx of Venezuelans coming into the country. A lot of people are concerned about migrant labor. We have those for it, we have those against it. In terms of, let's say, we were to look at the food industry, for instance. In Port of Spain, we have a lot of Spanish, a lot of Venezuelans, I should say. Let me use the correct term, Venezuelans, just setting up shop, selling these things. But you look at them and they don't have a food badge. So, as simple as adhering to proper procedures, it's not something that is being done. But you have the government on one hand saying, well, all right, we're going to have them in the country, we're going to have them employed for a certain number of years. What is your take on that?
Let me say that is a very good question, and from the perspective of the All Trinidad Regional Workers Trade Union and the National Solidarity Assembly, which is the political arm of the union, we are totally against what is happening, and I will tell you why. You have a large influx of illegal immigrants into the country. If you, and I see the government wishes to give a one-year amnesty. First of all, if you give a one-year amnesty, you must understand the logistics of how you are doing this, because what happens after that 1 year. In addition to that, are you going to circumvent the laws as it relates to income tax? Are you circumventing the law as it relates to national insurance? Because once you are making more than $200 and more a week, you are supposed to pay national insurance.
Yes.
So is the government going to circumvent the law or bring amended legislation to amend the law? Or is the government saying that there will be one way for the Venezuelans and one way for the citizens of this country? How is this going to affect our social services? How is it going to affect our education system, placement in schools? How is it going to affect our health sector? Are we then introducing a system in Trinidad and Tobago where you are seeing the creation of sweatshops, seeing the creation of cheap labor, and by bringing cheap labor, you are now undermining the rights and privileges and what trade unions would have fought for our own workers to enjoy? I hear the Minister of Agriculture talking about bringing them into the agricultural sector. You are saying that you want them in the agricultural sector, but what have you done for those members of your own citizenry who are willing, if given the enabling environment, to engage in agriculture? You still have thousands, and I come back to the point, you have thousands of colony workers to get the lands that are due to them. 14,000 acres of land. You have 5,000 people squatting on colony lands. You have about 4,000 agricultural squatters. You have thousands on colony tenanted land, former cane farmers. All these lands could be used to begin the process if you provide the necessary subsidies, infrastructure, drainage, crossing, irrigation to your own people and your own farmers to do what they have to do. So the government seems to be opening a Pandora's box that I am certainly not in agreement with. Because listen, what about crime? I am not inhumane, but what I am saying, we have to take care of the people of Trinidad and Tobago first before we could take care of anyone else, full stop. There are too many unanswered questions when it comes to the logistics of, I see 93 persons were taken before the courts and were allowed to go free. Where are they going? What are they going to do? So I am very wary of what is happening, and I'm a bit unsure as to the direction the government is taking, because I can tell you this. In about 5 years' time, the population demographics of Trinidad and Tobago is going to change to such an extent that we would not recognize the Trinidad that we knew 10 years ago. And that is something I'm fearful of.
And I don't think that's something good, because I mean,
it is not good at all.
We're slowly but surely losing our identity as
we are.
Something that you rightly said the trade unions have fought for over many years, and to see that overnight it's been slowly decreasing.
When you have people attacking and challenging law enforcement authority, when you have people acting as though they own Trinidad rather than they are asking for help, then we have a problem in Trinidad and Tobago. And that needs to be addressed. And I think the trade union movement needs to make, not only from a political perspective, but really need to make a statement on how unchecked immigration or illegal immigration into this country and that one-year amnesty is going to adversely affect the people that the trade union movement represent in Trinidad and Tobago.
Yeah, because you have...
Something needs to be said about that.
You have, like for any businessman, if you have someone coming in to do something that somebody is, you're paying them a certain amount of money, but you have someone coming in to do it at a lesser cost.
Correct.
Who would you choose? Obviously,
you choose the one where your cost of production is lower, and that leads us to another question. Is it that you have almost 40,000 persons who have been retrenched in Trinidad and Tobago, but you have about 40,000 coming in who will get a one-year amnesty to be employed at cheaper rates? Is it then the retrenchment, a deliberate plot to provide cheap labor and the creation of sweatshops to the manufacturers and that certain percentage of organizations that control the factors of production in the economy? All these are unanswered questions that the trade union movement must address.
It's just about 2 minutes before we wrap things up here on Iron Labor. I'm just going to ask you your final comments, Mr. Maharaj.
Well, I think, as I would have said before, I do believe the trade union movement must come together in a meaningful way, not simply based on issues, but we have to unite together from a political way in order to bring about the necessary legislative change in Trinidad and Tobago that will resound to the benefit of the working class and the people that we represent. So I would want to see not trade union coming together, I would want to see true and genuine trade union unity in Trinidad and Tobago. Yes. And thank you very much for having me this morning.
Thank you so much for coming on our show and just braving all the traffic and everything.
That's
to come
fine.
here.
If I'm ever invited again, I shall certainly make this trip once more.
We'll definitely have you on sometime.
Thank you very much.
Well, that's all we have time here for on PSA TV. This brings us to the end of Wake Up Call and Iron Labor. So I'm Christy Callising on behalf of all of us here at PSA TV. Here's wishing you a safe and blessed day.